Can you take her instead of me?" The boy's cracked voice trembled against the cruel September heat, echoing across Copper Creek's dusty street. His little sister clung to his sleeve, sobbing into a ragged doll, while the rancher towering above them said nothing. Ezra Blackthorn's shadow stretched long, his face unreadable, his silence heavier than any verdict. Around them, townsfolk froze, holding their breath as a child begged to trade his life for another's. In that moment, the frontier itself seemed to stop listening. Follow my story to the end, and don't forget leave a comment with the city you are watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The sun in Copper Creek did not forgive. It beat down mercilessly on the warped wooden storefronts and weary faces, turning dust into powder that clung to skin and crept into every breath. On that afternoon of 1887, the small town was nothing but a furnace of grit, silence, and suspicion. And in the middle of it all stood Daniel Harper. Barely 14, his body thin as a fence rail, but his eyes set with a kind of determination that seemed carved from stone. Beside him, his younger sister Lily, only 9, clung tightly to the tatters of his shirt. Her cheeks were smudged with dust, her hair tangled in pale ropes that caught the light despite their dirt. In her hands she clutched the only piece of her old life, a ragged cloth doll with button eyes. Her fear was written across her face, a fear no child should have known. Before them stood Ezra Blackthorn. He was a rancher whose name traveled far beyond the borders of Copper Creek, whispered with both respect and unease. Standing tall in a weathered brown coat, his wide-brimmed hat casting shadows that concealed the lines of age and hardship etched across his face, he looked like a man built of oak and stone. His mustache bristled in the hot wind, his dark eyes fixed on Daniel with a stillness that made the boy's chest tighten. Daniel's voice cracked, but he forced it steady. "Please, sir, take her instead of me." A murmur rippled through the street. A woman paused at the well. A blacksmith stilled his hammer mid-swing. A wagon rolled slower as if the horses themselves sensed something grave. Ezra said nothing. Daniel's throat was parched, his hands trembling as he clutched Lily's shoulders. He swallowed hard. "The Morrison gang. They're coming for me," he said. "I saw them that night at the bank. They know it was me. They'll kill me for it, but she—" He turned, looking at Lily, who stared up with wide, wet eyes. "She doesn't know anything. She's innocent." Lily gasped and shook her head, clinging tighter. "No, Danny, you promised Mama and Papa we'd stay together. Don't make me leave you." Her words cracked open something in him. For a flicker, the facade of a boy pretending to be a man gave way to a child barely holding back tears. Daniel knelt down to her level, gripping her small hands. His voice softened. "Lily, sometimes we've got to make choices we don't want. Choices that keep the people we love safe. Mr. Blackthorn's got a big ranch. You'd have food, a better chance at school. Everything Mama wanted for you." Her lip quivered. Tears streaked down her dirty cheeks. "But what about you?" Daniel forced a smile. "I'll figure something out. I'm tough." Remember, Ezra's hand hovered above his gun belt, fingers drumming idly against the leather as his gaze shifted between them. The silence stretched heavier with each passing second. Behind him, his black stallion stamped the dirt, snorting impatiently as though echoing the boy's plea. Finally, Ezra's voice broke through deep and gravelly. "Boy, he said you speak of the Morrison gang as if you know their mind. Tell me what makes you sure they saw you." Daniel's heart thudded, but he answered swiftly. "I was hiding behind the barrels outside the general store. They came out of the bank with sacks of money. One of them tall scar down his cheek. His eyes met mine, just for a second. But he knew. I swear it, sir. He knew." Ezra studied him long, his expression unreadable. "And you'd sacrifice yourself for her. Your own flesh and blood." "Yes, sir." Daniel's voice cracked, but he didn't waver. "She's all I've got left." The rancher's silence returned. Dust swirled down the street, the sun lowering shadows stretching. Lily wept quietly into her doll. Daniel held his ground, waiting, his heart pounding so loudly he thought the town must hear it. Ezra exhaled slowly. Then, with the weight of a man accustomed to command, he spoke. "What if I told you? I might be willing to take both of you." The boy blinked, stunned. His mouth opened, then closed. Suspicion crept across his features. Both of us. But sir, I told you they're after me. If you take me too, you bring trouble to your ranch. They'll come looking. Ezra adjusted his hat eyes, narrowing just slightly. Let me worry about the Morrison gang. I've dealt with outlaws before. My ranch is not an easy place to breach. Hope flickered in Daniel's chest, but with it came fear. Nothing in his short life had come without a price. His gaze dropped to Lily, who was staring at Ezra with a mixture of awe and terror. Daniel whispered half to her, half to himself, "What if it's too good to be true?" Ezra leaned forward, voice low but steady. "It might be. Or it might be the only chance either of you get. But hear this, if you come with me, you're under my roof, my protection and my authority. You'll do what I say when I say it. No questions. Is that clear?" Daniel swallowed hard but nodded. "Yes, sir." Lily wiped her tears, trembling but trying to mimic her brother's bravery. "Yes, sir." Ezra gave a single nod. "Then gather what's yours. We leave at sundown." He mounted his stallion in one smooth motion and rode toward the livery, his coat billowing like a shadow in the dying light. The townsfolk who had lingered now stirred again, whispers chasing after the horse's fading hoofbeats. Daniel and Lily stood alone in the dust, their decision made but their future uncertain. Daniel looked down at Lily, who hugged her doll tighter. "Do you really think the bad men will come for you?" she asked, voice trembling. He forced a brave smile, though doubt gnawed inside him. "I think we'll be safer with him than on the streets, and if the bad men don't come, at least we'll have a roof and food." She nodded slowly, leaning against him. For the first time in months, Daniel allowed a spark of hope to flicker within. But as the last rays of sun dipped behind the Rockies, he did not see the faint calculating glint in Ezra Blackthorn's eyes as the rancher disappeared into the distance. The boy had begged for one life to be spared. Instead, both were about to be tested in ways they could not yet imagine. The hours between Ezra Blackthorn's promise and the wagon's arrival felt stretched and uncertain, as though the dusty town of Copper Creek itself held its breath. Daniel Harper clutched Lily's hand as they moved through the streets, gathering what little they owned. Their worldly possessions amounted to almost nothing: a worn knife that had belonged to their father, a small locket with their mother's picture, a second-hand blanket, and the battered doll Lily would not let go of. All of it fit into a burlap sack that sagged as though it carried years of hardship. The townsfolk watched them. Some offered sympathetic nods, others shook their heads. Daniel could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken thought that the Blackthorn Ranch was no place for children, especially ones carrying trouble on their heels. A storekeeper muttered under his breath, "Poor kids don't know what they're getting into." Daniel pretended not to hear, but Lily caught it and squeezed his hand tighter. The sun sank low, staining the sky with streaks of crimson and gold. A wagon creaked up the main street, pulled by two sturdy bay horses. At the reins sat old Pete, a grizzled driver, whose tobacco-stained teeth flashed in a crooked grin when Ezra rode up beside him on his black stallion. Pete spat a stream into the dust and nodded toward the children. These the ones Boss Ezra only inclined his head. "Load up. We ride before full dark." Daniel lifted Lily onto the wagon bed first, then climbed in himself, settling them among sacks of grain and barrels of supplies. The wagon smelled of burlap and dried beans. Ezra rode beside them, silent, his profile etched against the fading sun. Daniel studied him, searching for cracks in the man's stone-hard expression, but found only shadows. The wagon lurched forward. Copper Creek receded behind them, its tired buildings and dusty streets swallowed by distance and twilight. Daniel exhaled slowly, the reality pressing in. This was it. There was no turning back. For a long while, the only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the clop of hooves, and Lily's soft breathing beside him. She clutched her doll wide-eyed at the passing hills. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Mr. Blackthorn." He began hesitant. "Why are you doing this? Why take us both? You don't even know us." Ezra didn't turn. His voice came low, almost swallowed by the hoofbeats. "I've got my reasons. That was all." "Nothing more." Daniel pressed. "But it doesn't make sense. We've got nothing to offer you, only trouble." Ezra's fingers drummed against his saddle horn. At last he said, "Work. That's what you offer. My ranch is big, too big for one man to run. Everyone pulls their weight, even children. It was blunt, but Daniel felt an odd sense of relief. Work he could understand. Work was fair, unlike the cruelty of hunger and cold streets. He nodded. "I can work, sir." "I'll do whatever you need," Lily piped up softly. "I can help too. I can cook. Mama taught me." For the first time, Ezra's mouth twitched beneath his mustache. Not a smile exactly, but close. "We'll see." The wagon rolled on. The landscape shifted, flat plains giving way to rolling hills. Pine trees appeared their dark shapes, whispering in the cooling wind. The air grew cleaner, sharper, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. For the first time in months, Daniel felt the press of something other than fear-wonder. "Look, Lily," he whispered, pointing at a herd of deer grazing near a stream. Their sleek forms lifted their heads as the wagon passed, ears twitching, then bent to drink again. Lily's mouth opened in awe. "It's like one of Mama's stories," she breathed. The wagon stopped at a grove of aspens as night fell. Old Pete unhitched the horses while Ezra set about building a small fire. The flames painted the trunks gold, the leaves trembling like coins in the breeze. Pete handed them bowls of beans and hardtack. Daniel and Lily ate hungrily, grateful for food that was warm and plentiful. Ezra sat across the fire, his face flickering in the glow. For a long while he said nothing, simply watching them eat. Daniel shifted under the scrutiny. Finally Ezra spoke, his tone steady. "Tell me about your parents." The question struck like a stone in Daniel's chest. He glanced at Lily, whose eyes filled instantly. He cleared his throat. "They died last spring. Cholera." Ezra nodded once as though he had expected it. "How long have you been on your own since then?" "We moved from town to town, worked odd jobs when folks would take us, slept wherever we could when they wouldn't." Ezra's eyes darkened, shadows moving across his face. "And you've kept her alive through all that." Daniel stiffened. "She's all I've got. I'd do anything for her." The rancher's gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then he said, "We'll see what that means." Beside Daniel, Lily yawned, curling against his shoulder. He wrapped the blanket around her thin frame, listening to her breathing slow. She was asleep within moments, her doll tucked against her chest. Daniel remained awake long after staring into the flames. Across the fire, Ezra still sat upright, silent and watchful, as though guarding them or judging them. Daniel could not tell which. When dawn came, the world was silver with frost. The grass sparkled beneath the first rays of sun. Pete hitched the horses, and the journey continued. As the wagon climbed higher into the foothills, Daniel's exhaustion faded into awe. The valley stretched before them, endless and wild, with mountains rising like stone sentinels against the horizon. By noon, they crested a ridge. Ezra reined in his horse, lifting a hand. "There," he said. Daniel followed his gaze, and his breath caught. Below lay a vast valley, green and sprawling. A river wound like a silver ribbon through its heart. Herds of cattle dotted the plains, their shapes moving slow and steady. And nestled against cottonwoods by the river stood a cluster of buildings, barns, corrals, bunkhouses, and at the center a two-story ranch house with a wide porch. Ezra's voice carried a rare note of pride. "Welcome to Blackthorn Ranch." Daniel stared speechless. After months of alleyways and hunger, the sight seemed unreal, like stepping into a dream too fragile to trust. Beside him, Lily whispered, "It's so big." Ezra nodded. "And now it's your home if you can earn it." Daniel tightened his grip on the burlap sack. Hope swelled in his chest, tangled with fear. He looked at Lily, whose eyes shone brighter than he had seen in months. But even as the wagon descended into the valley, he couldn't shake one thought. Nothing this good had ever come without a cost. They rolled off the ridge and into the valley, like slipping from one life into another. The road widened, its ruts smoothed by wagon wheels, and the smells changed wild sage, giving way to sun-warmed hay leather oil and the deep animal musk of cattle. A windmill clacked lazily as it turned. Dogs trotted alongside, tails raised like question marks as they sniffed at Lily's dangling shoes. The main yard opened in a burst of light and dust. Men looked up from their work, some with hats in their hands, others pausing mid-swing of pitchforks. Horses tossed their heads in the corral, snorting and stamping. Set back beneath cottonwoods, the big house watched everything with whitewashed calm, its wide porch shaded and still. Ezra Blackthorn lifted two fingers and the yard seemed to realign around that small signal. A foreman stepped forward, compact, dark-haired, turning silver at the temples, eyes calm as winter water. "Miguel Ortega," he said, tipping his hat to Ezra, then to the children. "Welcome." Daniel felt every rip in his shirt, every threadbare patch on his knees. Lily slid behind his hip. Miguel's gaze was frank but warm, softening when it fell on her. "These two will be staying," Ezra said. His voice wasn't raised yet. Everyone heard it. "Find them quarters. Set the house rules." Miguel nodded once. "Sí, patrón." He gestured to Daniel and Lily. "Come, pequeños. You look hungry." They crossed the yard, dodging a wheelbarrow and a laughing hand carrying a crate of eggs like it was made of glass. Lily stared at the neat fences, the stacked firewood, the hand pump, where a woman in a blue apron filled a bucket. From somewhere inside the big house drifted the smell of bread. Lily's stomach growled. Daniel nudged her gently. "It's all right," he whispered. Miguel stopped at a smaller building set near the cottonwoods, not far from the bunkhouse but apart from it. It had a stone chimney and shutters painted a tired green. He pushed open the door. "Used to be the office before the big house got its study," he said. "Now it's spare quarters. 2 rooms, a hearth. Not fancy, but dry and warm. Dry and warm." The words hit Daniel like rain after drought. Inside, a thin rug covered the plank floor. On the table sat a basin, a sliver of lye soap, and 2 folded towels, clean enough to make his throat tighten. In the corner, firewood waited beneath a neatly hung iron kettle. A woman appeared at the threshold with a basket on her hip. Strong hands, sun-browned cheeks, scarf tied at her neck. Rosa Miguel said, "My wife." She smiled first at Lily, and the child smiled back before she knew she'd done it. "For now you wash," Rosa said in careful English, setting the basket down. "Then you eat." Inside lay a loaf of crusty bread, 2 apples, a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth, and a jar of milk still beaded from the spring house. Lily's eyes went wide. "Is it all for us?" Rosa laughed softly. "For now. Tomorrow more if you work." The rule was clear, softened by the warmth in her voice. Daniel washed Lily's hands and face, then his own. The water ran gray and gritty. He dared not waste more than 1 fill. Between them they ate half the bread, the cheese, and both apples, saving the rest without speaking. Old habits died slowly. Miguel leaned against the doorframe while they ate. "The patron runs a tight outfit," he said, as though noting the weather. "We start before sun and stop when the light goes. But there is order. People look out for each other. You pull your weight, you'll find your place." Daniel chewed slowly. "What if we don't know how?" Miguel's mouth tilted. "Then you learn." His gaze flicked to Lily. "You mañana you come with me and Rosa to the kitchen. We show you how to help. Simple things first. Wash, peel, stir." Lily nodded earnestly, chin high with sudden pride that made Daniel's chest ache. Footsteps sounded outside. Ezra's shadow filled the doorway before he did. He looked at the unmade beds, the half-eaten food, the dust drying on the basin's rim. He took it all in like a man tallying inventory, thorough, not unkind. "You'll be woken by the bell," he said. "Daniel, you'll be with Miguel at first light. Fences need mending on the north pasture. After that, we'll see." "Lily, you mind Rosa. This is a working ranch, not a charity house." "Yes, sir," Daniel said quickly, and Lily echoed him, small and solemn. Ezra's gaze held on Daniel a heartbeat longer. "You said you'd do whatever it takes. We'll test that." When he was gone, the room felt both larger and somehow emptier. Daniel set down the bread, aware of the tremor in his hands. Lily noticed and tucked her small fingers into his palm. "Is he angry, Danny?" "I don't think so," Daniel murmured. "I think he's just how he is." He tried to smile. "And I think he means it about work." That evening, Rosa led them to supper. The long table outside the cookhouse glowed under lantern light. Men ate hungrily, passing tin plates, speaking in Spanish and English. Rosa smoothed Lily's hair, then nudged her forward. "These are Daniel and Lily," she announced. "They are family for now, family for now." The phrase rang like a far bell. Old Pete sat nearby, grinning like his face had been made for it. "Knew you two would make it," he said, sliding a plate their way. The food was plain but rich beef stew, heavy with carrots, bread sliced tomatoes from a garden patch. Daniel ate until his stomach ached, ashamed of how quickly his hand went back for more. Nobody said a word about it. Across the table, a young ranch hand muttered, "Bringing in kids now. That what we do with the boss's money." Miguel's gaze cut across the table like a thrown rope. The boy Jeremiah, someone called him, looked down fast. Daniel burned with shame, but Lily pressed her shoulder against his, as if to say she had heard too and didn't care. After supper, Rosa walked them back to their quarters. "Sleep," she said, touching Lily's hair. "Morning comes quick here." In bed, Lily whispered in the dark, "Do you think he'll really keep us?" Daniel lay awake long after she slept, listening to the ranch settle the soft lowing of cattle, the distant bark of a coy dog, the sigh of wood as doors shut. He thought of the scar-faced outlaw, of Ezra's measured eyes, of Rosa's hands, and the clean towels, and the taste of bread when you weren't saving every crumb for tomorrow. He thought of the cost he could not yet name. At first light, a bell rang a polished tone that slipped under doors and into dreams. Daniel jolted upright. Lily sat too hair-wild, blinking. The air promised a cooler day. They dressed quickly in the clothes Rosa had left, a pair of patched trousers for Daniel that nearly fit a simple dress for Lily, the color of creek water. Outside the yard was already alive. Smoke curled from the cookhouse chimney. Men saddled horses, and Ezra stood with Miguel near the porch. Miguel lifted a hand. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Daniel said, his voice sounding older than he felt. Miguel handed him a pair of thin gloves, the leather soft at the palms. "For the wire," he said. "It bites." He glanced to Lily. "Rosa waits for you." Lily hesitated, looking up at Daniel. He squeezed her hand. "Go on," he said. "You'll be great." She nodded and ran braid bouncing, and Rosa caught her up like she had been waiting all along. The morning had begun. The trail out of the ranch yard rose toward the foothills, and by the time the sun had fully cleared the eastern ridge, the world beyond Copper Creek seemed like another country. The wagon creaked and swayed with each rut, old Pete snapping the reins. Ezra Blackthorne riding his black stallion alongside in silence. Daniel sat in the back with Lily tucked against him, the burlap sack of their meager belongings between their knees. The deeper they traveled, the more the air changed. The flatlands gave way to rolling hills dressed in sagebrush, then to groves of pine whose resin scented the breeze. Streams whispered beside the road, catching sunlight like silver ribbons. A hawk circled high overhead, and once a family of mule deer bounded across their path, white tails flashing. Daniel tried not to show it, but wonder tugged at him. He had lived all his 14 years in towns that smelled of dust and sweat, where alleys reeked of refuse and sickness. This place, with its wide sky and mountains standing like watchmen on the horizon, felt like stepping into a story Mama used to tell when she tucked them in at night. Lily whispered, her eyes wide, "Danny, it looks like heaven." He forced a smile, though his chest ached. "Maybe it is." By mid-afternoon, they stopped in a sheltered hollow where aspens quivered and tossed their golden leaves in the wind. Old Pete unhitched the horses while Ezra stacked wood for a fire. Sparks caught, and soon the smell of beans and salt pork filled the grove. Lily's stomach growled audibly. Rosa, had she been there, would have laughed. Daniel only patted her arm, urging patience. They ate from tin bowls. Lily cradled hers like a treasure, sipping slowly to make it last. Daniel shoveled the food in his hunger gnawing, too fierce to pretend otherwise. He felt Ezra's gaze on him steady and silent, but when he dared look up, the rancher's eyes were unreadable as ever. The fire snapped. Daniel set his empty bowl down and finally asked what had gnawed at him since Copper Creek. "Mr. Blackthorne." He said, his voice careful. "Why did you take us both?" "I told you the Morrison gang wants me. It'll bring trouble." Ezra didn't answer at once. He leaned back on his saddle, rolled beside the fire, one boot stretched toward the flames. "Boy," he said finally, "you carry yourself like a man ready to trade his life for his sister's. That tells me more than your words. I took you because of that. The rest, we'll see." Daniel frowned. "But you don't know us. We could be lying. We could be trouble." Ezra's mustache twitched. "You are trouble. Any child without a roof is trouble. But trouble's only worth something if it carries grit. We'll learn soon enough what kind you are." Lily huddled closer to Daniel, uneasy. He smoothed her hair and whispered, "It's all right." When darkness deepened, Pete rolled out blankets. Lily curled against Daniel, under one clutching her doll Annie. Across the fire, Ezra sat upright, his hat pulled low but his eyes still glinting beneath. Daniel lay awake, every crack of a twig stirring his nerves, wondering if Ezra was watching them or simply listening to the night. Sleep came in fits. He dreamed of the scar-faced outlaw peering at him from the barrels of gunfire in the street of Lily being pulled from his arms. He woke sweating, only to find Ezra's silhouette unmoved by the embers, a sentinel cut against the starlit sky. At dawn, frost silvered the grass. Lily's breath puffed in tiny clouds as she rubbed her eyes. Ezra roused them briskly, and soon they were climbing higher into the foothills. The air grew sharper, carrying the scent of snow, even though summer had barely slipped into autumn. Daniel pulled Lily's blanket tighter around her shoulders, murmuring encouragement. By noon, they crested a ridge. Ezra lifted his hand, and old Pete reined the wagon to a halt. "Look," Ezra said. Daniel followed his gaze and forgot to breathe. Below sprawled a valley vast enough to swallow Copper Creek whole. A river wound through its center, flashing silver. Dark cattle dotted the grassland like seeds moving slowly in the distance. And near the river's bend stood the ranch barns, roofed in fresh shingles, corrals, sturdy and straight bunkhouses lying neat as soldiers. At the center, a two-story home with a wide porch and a chimney smoking faintly. Ezra's voice carried a rare note of pride. Blackthorn Ranch, 20 years of my life in that valley. Started with a horse and a rifle. Now it's the largest spread in 3 counties. Daniel could not answer. After months of shivering in barns and alleys, of counting crumbs to keep Lily alive, this sight was too much. His throat closed. Beside him, Lily clutched his sleeve. "It's beautiful, Danny," she whispered. "Do you think we'll really get to stay here?" He forced his voice steady. "If we work hard, if we prove ourselves." Ezra guided his stallion down the trail, and the wagon followed. As they drew closer, details sharpened the sound of hammering from a barn, the scent of hay drying in the sun, the murmur of men working cattle. Some ranch hands looked up as they passed, tipping hats toward Ezra, though their eyes lingered curiously on the children. They rolled into the main yard. Dogs barked, horses whinnied, and Miguel Ortega appeared wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked at the children, then at Ezra. "These two will stay," Ezra said. "They'll earn their keep." Miguel studied Danielle a moment, then Lily. His gaze softened. "Bienvenidos," he said simply. "Come, I'll show you." He led them to a small house near the cottonwoods. Inside were 2 beds with real mattresses, a table, a hearth with a stack of wood. Daniel stared, disbelieving. Lily ran a hand across the quilt, her mouth round in awe. "Rosa will bring food," Miguel said. "You'll need strength. Tomorrow, work begins." Ezra's voice followed like a shadow. "Remember what I told you, my roof, my rules. No questions." Daniel met his dark eyes, heart hammering. "Yes, sir." Ezra lingered a beat longer, then turned and left his boots striking hard against the packed dirt. For the first time in months, Daniel and Lily stood in a place that smelled not of dust and fear, but of wood smoke and bread. They looked at each other, disbelief and hope tangled in their faces. Danny Lily whispered, "Is this real?" He took her hand, staring at the hearth as if fire might spring to life there on its own. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we're here. That's what matters." Outside, the ranch bustled. Inside, the children let themselves, for one fragile moment, believe in a tomorrow that might not hurt. Evening settled on the valley like a heavy quilt, the last light spilling gold over the rooftops of the Blackthorn Ranch. Daniel and Lily stood in their small house, the smell of wood and fresh quilts wrapping around them like a dream. It was the first time in months they weren't in an alley or an abandoned loft. Yet Daniel's shoulders stayed tight, suspicion sitting in his chest like a stone. A soft knock broke the silence. When Daniel opened the door, Rosa stood there, her arms full of a basket. Her scarf was tied neatly at her neck, her cheeks rosy from the cookhouse fire. She stepped inside without waiting for invitation and set the basket on the table. "Food," she said simply. When Lily lifted the cloth cover, her gasp filled the little house. A round loaf of bread, thick stew sealed in a clay jar, and 2 mugs of fresh milk. Lily's fingers hovered like she was afraid the food might vanish. "Go on," Rosa urged gently. "Eat." They did. Lily tore the bread with both hands, stuffing her mouth, eyes shining with delight. Daniel forced himself to eat slower, though hunger gnawed fierce. He caught Rosa watching him, not with pity, but with careful study, as if measuring him. When Lily finally leaned back, her belly full, Daniel wiped her face with the corner of his sleeve. Rosa smiled faintly. "Mañana," she said, tapping Lily's shoulder. "You come with me. Kitchen, learn." Lily's eyes lit up. "Really, I can help, see. You will help." Daniel's chest ached at the sight of his sister's pride. Later, after Rosa left, Daniel tended the small fire in the hearth. Lily sat on her bed, clutching Annie. Her doll eyes half closed with sleep. The quilt lay over her legs, warmer than anything they'd known in a long time. "Danny," she whispered. "Do you think Mr. Blackthorne will really keep us or send us away?" Daniel stared into the fire. Ezra's words. "My roof. My rules echoed like iron." "I don't know," he admitted. "But as long as we work hard, maybe he will." Sleep came easier that night. The air smelled of wood smoke, not rot. The beds creaked with comfort, not dampness. For the first time since their parents' deaths, Lily slept deeply. Her hand curled around Annie. Daniel lay awake longer, staring at the rafters, listening to the steady beat of his own heart. At dawn, the bell rang. Its metallic toll carried across the ranch, pulling them from dreams. Daniel scrambled up, helping Lily dress in the plain but clean clothes Rosa had given her the night before. When they stepped outside, the ranch was alive already. Men saddled horses, dogs barked at cattle being driven into corrals, smoke drifted from the cookhouse. Ezra waited, hat-brim shading his face, Miguel beside him. His eyes swept over the children like a foreman tallying stock. "Daniel," he said, "you're with Miguel. North fence needs repair. Hard work, but honest." "Yes, sir," Daniel answered quickly. Ezra turned to Lily. "You go with Rosa. She'll show you your part. Everyone earns their keep here." "I will," Mr. Blackthorne, Lily said with a shy nod. Ezra's eyes softened just a fraction. Then he tipped his head toward Miguel. "See what the boy's made of." Miguel led Daniel toward the corral where tools leaned against a rail. He handed him gloves, thick leather patched at the palms. "You wear these, wire cuts deep." Daniel tugged them on the leather stiff against his thin fingers. The morning passed in sweat and struggle. Mending the north fence meant driving posts into stubborn earth, hauling spools of barbed wire that seemed to have a will of its own. Daniel's hands burned blisters rising even through the gloves. Miguel worked beside him, steady and patient, showing him how to hammer staples without splitting wood, how to twist the wire taut. By noon, Daniel's shirt clung damp to his back, his arms shaking with each swing of the hammer. He nearly dropped a post, but Miguel caught it, clapping his shoulder. Despacio, the foreman, said gently, "Slow. Strength grows. No need to kill yourself day one." Daniel gritted his teeth. "I can do it." Miguel's eyes crinkled. "I believe you." When Ezra rode up mid-afternoon, Daniel straightened despite his aching back. The rancher studied the stretched wire the post set firm the boy's blistered hands. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he nodded once and rode on. That small nod felt like a metal pinned to Daniel's chest. Meanwhile, Lily thrived in the kitchen. Rosa showed her how to stir pots without spilling, how to wash vegetables from the garden, how to knead dough with her small fists. By lunchtime, she presented Daniel with a misshapen roll of bread, her face glowing with pride. "I made this," she exclaimed. Daniel bit into it. It was dense, lopsided, but warm and real. He smiled. "It's the best bread I ever tasted." Rosa chuckled softly, patting Lily's shoulder. "She learns quick." By evening, Daniel could barely lift his arms, but when Lily tugged him toward their little house, showing off her apron smeared with flour, he felt lighter. They had worked. They had earned their supper. That night, Rosa brought them beef stew and fresh milk again. As they ate, Daniel noticed something. Rosa's eyes lingered on him often, as if watching not just how he ate, but how he looked at his sister, how he carried himself. When Lily fell asleep, Daniel whispered to the darkness, "We'll make it work here. We have to." Outside, the wind rattled the cottonwoods, and on the porch of the big house, Ezra stood smoking his pipe, his eyes fixed on the small glow of the children's hearth. Morning came hard and early. The bell's iron tongue rang across the valley before the first line of gold broke over the ridge. Daniel stumbled awake, his muscles screaming from the fence work of the day before. His hands throbbed beneath the stiff leather gloves he had left on the table. When he sat up, he found Lily already dressed, her hair braided into two crooked plaits, face scrubbed pink from the basin. She held her apron like a banner of pride. "Rosa says today I get to help make pies," she whispered, excitement glowing in her eyes. Daniel smiled through the ache. "Then you'd better show her you're the best helper she's ever had." He washed his face in the icy water, the sting jolting him fully awake, then pulled on the patched trousers Rosa had left for him. Together they stepped into the crisp morning. Dew silvered the grass, smoke curled from chimneys. Men's voices rose from the corrals where horses stamped and snorted. The ranch was alive, each piece moving in rhythm. Ezra stood near the porch, hands on his hips, speaking low with Miguel. His dark eyes tracked Daniel and Lily as they passed, a silent reminder that their every step was measured. Miguel beckoned Danielle with a tilt of his chin. "Ready for more?" "Yes, sir," Daniel said, though his body begged otherwise. Today's work was mucking stalls in the horse barn. The smell of manure and hay hit sharp, but Daniel forced himself not to flinch. Miguel handed him a pitchfork. Clean bedding out, fresh straw in, simple but not easy. The hours blurred into sweat and sore arms. Daniel forked heavy loads into the wheelbarrow, hauled it outside, dumped it, and returned again. Horses watched him with dark eyes, tails flicking at flies. When he paused too long, Miguel's voice reminded him gently, "Despacio, muchacho." Steady, not rushed. Work's a river, not a race. By midday, Daniel's shoulders burned, his back bowed. But when Miguel clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Bueno, you work like a man, not a boy," Daniel felt a flicker of pride warm the exhaustion. Lunch was stew and bread in the cookhouse yard. Daniel carried his bowl carefully, searching for Lily. He found her at Rosa's side, flour smudged across her cheeks, her hands sticky with dough. She held up a small pie crust, lopsided, but intact, her smile wide. "Danny, look what I made," he laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. "That's real fine, Lily." Rosa shook her head with fond amusement. "She learns rapido. By winter she make bread better than me." Daniel sat beside his sister, and for a moment the ache in his muscles faded. She was safe, fed, even laughing. That alone made every blister worth it. After the meal, Daniel returned to the barn. Miguel put him to work oiling tack, showing him how to rub saddle leather until it shone. Ezra passed by once, silent as always. His gaze lingered on Daniel's raw hands, then shifted to Lily, across the yard, giggling at something Rosa had said. He nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, before walking on. That evening, as lanterns flickered to life, Daniel sat with Lily outside their little house. The stars stretched endless overhead, the air sharp with pine. Lily leaned against him, her voice dreamy. "Danny, I think I like it here. It feels like a real home." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, heart twisting. "It does. But don't forget what Mr. Blackthorne said. We have to earn it." She yawned. "Then we will." When she slept, Daniel remained awake, staring at the lights of the big house across the yard. Ezra stood on the porch, arms folded, a dark figure against the lamplight. Their eyes met across the distance. Ezra raised his pipe to his lips, then turned away. Daniel shivered, though the night wasn't cold. He couldn't tell if the rancher was watching as a guardian or as a judge waiting to render his verdict. The morning began with shouts and the high-pitched squeal of a horse in distress. Daniel had just finished pitching straw into the last stall when Miguel's voice cut through the barn. "Muchacho." To the corral rapido, Daniel dropped the fork and ran his boots skidding over packed dirt. At the corral, half a dozen ranch hands circled a bay mare that lashed out with her hind legs, eyes rolling white foam at her mouth. She reared and struck the rails, the wood shuddering under the impact. "That one's cursed," a hand muttered. "Tempest'll kill someone before she lets a saddle touch her." Ezra stood outside the ring hat, low arms crossed. His eyes flicked to Daniel briefly, then back to the horse. Daniel leaned on the fence, breathing hard. Something tugged inside him, sharp as a memory. He had seen that look before, not rage, but terror. Stray dogs, beaten cats, even Lily's eyes after their parents died, it was the same wild, cornered fear. "She's not mean," Daniel said quietly. She's scared. Miguel glanced at him. How can you tell? See how she keeps favoring her left side. Somebody hurt her. Spurs, maybe. Or a whip. She's not fighting because she's wild. She thinks we're here to hurt her again. The men chuckled. What do you know, boy? One sneered. You've mucked a few stalls and now you're a horse doctor. But Ezra's voice cut across the mockery. Let him try. The laughter died. All eyes turned to Daniel. His heart thudded in his chest. Go on. Ezra said, his tone flat but commanding. If you think you see something the rest of us don't, show me. Daniel hesitated. The mare snorted, pawing the dirt ears pinned back. She was bigger than any horse he had ever touched. If she struck, she could crush him. But Lily's face flashed in his mind, her trust, her belief that he could protect her. He squared his shoulders, swung a leg over the fence, and dropped into the corral. Gasps rippled through the hands. Miguel swore under his breath. Daniel kept his eyes low, his movements slow. He crouched slightly, making himself smaller. Easy, girl, he murmured. Nobody's going to hurt you, not me. Tempest snorted, stomping back, but she didn't charge. Daniel took another slow step. I know what it's like, he whispered, words spilling out like secrets. To not trust anyone. To think every hand reaching for you means pain, but I won't hurt you, not ever. For long minutes, boy and horse watched each other across the dust. Slowly, Tempest's ears pricked forward. Her breathing eased. Daniel extended his hand, palm open. That's it, he whispered. I won't grab you. I just want to be your friend. The mare stretched her neck cautiously, her nostrils flaring. She nudged his palm once, twice, then pressed her soft muzzle against him. A cheer rose from the men. Miguel's eyes widened. In 3 days, none of us could get near her, and this muchacho, he shook his head half in awe, half in disbelief. Daniel stroked the mare's neck gently, careful not to startle her. She quivered under his touch, but she didn't pull away. After a few minutes, he slipped a simple rope halter over her head. When he finally climbed back over the fence, sweat trickling down his temple, the ranch hands muttered among themselves. Incredible, Miguel said. I've worked horses 30 years and never seen such a thing. You have a gift, Daniel. Daniel ducked his head, embarrassed. Animals just need to know they're safe. Once they trust you, they'll follow you anywhere. Ezra stepped forward. His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked on Daniel. He said nothing, only inclined his head once, a motion so small it might have been missed. But Daniel felt its weight. That night, as the ranch quieted and Lily snored softly in her bed, a knock rattled their door. Daniel opened it to find Ezra standing there, pipe smoke curling in the lamplight. Walk with me, the rancher said. Daniel's stomach tightened. He followed Ezra up a small rise overlooking the valley. Below, lanterns flickered in the bunkhouses, cattle lowed in the distance, and the river glimmered under the moon. Ezra stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the land he owned. I hear you worked wonders with Tempest today, he said finally. Yes, sir, Daniel murmured. She's not a bad horse. Just scared. Ezra turned his head, his gaze sharp. And how did you know that? Daniel hesitated. Because I know what it's like. For the first time, Ezra's mouth twitched in what might have been approval. Then his voice hardened. Tell me something, boy. If it came down to it, your life or your sister's, which would you save? Daniel's heart pounded. He stared at the rancher, stunned by the question. Her, he said finally without hesitation. Always her, even if it meant your death. Yes. Ezra studied him in silence, then nodded once. Good. Daniel frowned. Why do you ask me that? Ezra's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. Because I need to know what kind of boy you really are. The night air on the rise was cool, crisp with pine and the faint iron tang of the river winding far below. Daniel shifted uneasily under Ezra Blackthorn's gaze. The man's questions pressed harder than any work Miguel had set him to. You answered without hesitation, Ezra said at last, his voice gravelly. That tells me more than a week of watching you haul posts and muck stalls. Daniel swallowed. His palms were clammy despite the cold. I don't see how it matters, sir. Lily's all I have. Of course I'd protect her. Ezra's dark eyes narrowed slightly as though testing the shape of his words. And if protecting her meant doing something you knew was wrong, something against the law, against your conscience, would you still do it? Daniel hesitated this time, but only a moment. If it kept her safe, yes, I'd do anything. Anything. The rancher studied him in silence, pipe smoke curling upward like a slow-moving ghost. Finally, Ezra nodded as if the boy had confirmed something long suspected. That's what I needed to hear. Daniel's chest tightened. Why Ezra turned toward the valley silhouetted against the moonlit expanse of his land? Because loyalty is rarer than gold out here. Men will work for pay. Women will cook for coin, but few will put another's life above their own. That's the kind of person I need near me. Daniel frowned. Need near you for what Ezra's answer was a long moment coming. We'll see. The silence stretched. Crickets sang in the grass. Down at the ranch, a dog barked once, then quieted. Daniel cleared his throat uneasy. Mr. Blackthorne, why did you take us in? Really? Ezra's head tilted slightly. I already told you, work. My ranch is too big for idle hands. But you could have hired grown men, stronger, faster. You chose us instead. The rancher's mustache twitched. You ask too many questions for a boy. Daniel's jaw set. Maybe. But you didn't answer. For the first time, Ezra looked directly at him, a sharp glint in his eyes. Because I wanted to see what you'd do when pressed, whether you'd break or stand firm. Now I know. Daniel's heart pounded. He wanted to push further, but something in Ezra's gaze warned him off. The man was a wall of stone, revealing only what he chose. They walked back to the small house in silence. At the door, Ezra paused. Remember what you said tonight, boy. Words like that carry weight, and one day you'll be held to them. Daniel nodded mutely, throat dry. Ezra turned his boots crunching on gravel and disappeared into the shadows of the yard. Inside, Lily stirred in her bed. Danny, she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. Where'd you go? Just talking with Mr. Blackthorne, he whispered. What about Daniel? Hesitated, looking at her small face in the dim light. She was so young, still clinging to the comfort of her doll. He couldn't burden her with the strange test Ezra seemed to be giving him. Nothing important. He lied softly. Go back to sleep. She sighed and turned over asleep again within moments. Daniel lay awake long after Ezra's words circling in his head like wolves. The next days followed the rhythm of ranch life. Dawn to dusk, there was no shortage of work. Daniel learned to mend gates, haul feed, and scrape mud from hooves. His hands toughened, his muscles hardened. Miguel offered quiet instruction, never scolding, only correcting with a steady patience. Lily bloomed under Rosa's care. She learned to stir soups without spilling, to pluck chickens clean, to tend a garden row with small but determined hands. Her laughter returned light, unguarded. Daniel caught it once when she ran across the yard with flour dusting her hair. For a moment he almost forgot the weight of Ezra's questions. Almost. Because Ezra never stopped watching. He passed by the corral silent, his eyes flicking to Daniel's work, then moving on. At supper, his gaze lingered on how Daniel spoke to Lily, how he served her first before taking his portion. It was a constant pressure, invisible yet heavy, like the boy was being measured against some hidden scale. One evening, as the sun bled red across the valley, Ezra summoned Daniel again. They stood near the fence line, the air humming with crickets. You've done well, Ezra said, voice low. Miguel tells me you work like a man, not a boy. Rosa says Lily is quick, willing, eager. That speaks to the way you've raised her since your folks died. Daniel shifted uneasy at the rare praise. Thank you, sir. Ezra's gaze sharpened. But work is one thing, character is another. I don't keep people here who can't be trusted. If you stay, you'll be more than ranch hands. You'll be part of something larger. That means loyalty. That means obedience. No exceptions. Daniel's pulse quickened. I understand. Do you? Ezra's voice rumbled. Because I will test you. Again. And when that time comes, you'll remember what you swore, that you'd do anything to protect your sister. Anything. Daniel's mouth went dry. He nodded, though his heart thudded uneasily. Ezra studied him another moment, then turned back toward the house. The conversation was over. Daniel stood in the gathering dark, the valley stretching wide and endless around him. He thought of Lily laughing in Rosa's kitchen, of her small hand gripping his as she whispered she felt safe here. And he thought of Ezra's words heavy as iron chains. I will test you again. The boy swallowed hard. He had no idea what that test might be, but he knew one thing with certainty. He would not fail it. Not if Lily's future depended on it. The test came sooner than Daniel expected. 2 nights after Ezra's warning, the ranch yard was quiet under a wide silver moon. The bunkhouses had gone dark, and only the lowing of cattle in the far pasture stirred the silence. Daniel was in bed. Lily curled against her quilt with Annie the doll pressed to her chest when a heavy knock rattled the door. He shot upright. Boy Ezra's voice called low but commanding. Come with me. Daniel pulled on his boots and slipped outside. The night air bit cold sharp with pine and wood smoke. Ezra stood waiting, pipe glowing faintly in his hand. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the ridge that overlooked the valley. Daniel followed his pulse quickening with each step. The rancher's silence was heavier than words. At the crest, Ezra stopped. The land stretched out below them in moonlight, the corrals, the barns, the cottonwoods standing like sentinels along the river. For a long moment, Ezra said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice even. Boy, the Morrison gang you claim hunts you. They were caught. 3 days after the bank robbery. Sheriffs got them locked in Copper Creek jail waiting for a circuit judge. Daniel froze the words slamming into him like a hammer. What Ezra turned his head, his eyes catching the moonlight. There's no scar-faced outlaw after you, no gang riding in the dark. That fear you've been carrying, it's smoke. Nothing more. Daniel's knees went weak. He stumbled back, shaking his head. That can't be. I saw them. He looked right at me. The bank was robbed, Ezra cut in. That's true, but you were never in danger, not from them. Daniel's chest heaved, anger and betrayal flooding through him. Then why tell me nothing? Why bring us here under a lie? Ezra's face stayed carved from stone, because I needed to see what kind of boy you are, whether you'd protect your sister when you thought it meant your death, whether you'd hand her off to me out of fear or stand beside her no matter the cost. Daniel's fists clenched. You tested us. You played with our lives. You had no lives to play with. Ezra replied sharply. You were starving in alleys, boy. Winter would have finished you both. That was real danger whether you admit it or not. Daniel's breath came fast, his heart hammering in his ears. So everything Copper Creek the gang was just some kind of trick. Ezra's gaze softened only a fraction, not a trick, a measure, and you passed. Daniel staggered, the weight of it crashing over him. Relief, confusion, fury, and something he couldn't name tangled inside him until he could hardly breathe. You don't get it, he whispered hoarsely. I believed every word. I thought Lily's life was at stake. I was ready to. His voice broke. And all along it was nothing. Ezra placed a hand on his shoulder, heavy, firm. It was everything, boy. Because you showed me who you are when the fire's hottest. You showed me you'd die for her. That's what I needed to know. Daniel jerked away, trembling. He wanted to scream, to curse, to strike at the man who had twisted his fear into some cruel lesson. But Ezra's eyes, steady and dark, held him frozen. Why, Daniel demanded, finally, his voice raw. Why do you care what kind of boy I am? Ezra turned back toward the valley, his silhouette stark against the moon. Because this ranch won't last forever. I built it with my own hands, but I won't live to see it through alone. I've been looking for someone worth carrying it forward. Someone with loyalty in his bones. Maybe I found him. The words hung in the air like a brand. Daniel's anger sputtered, confusion taking its place. You mean, Ezra nodded slowly. I mean, I needed to know if you and your sister were worth more than mouths to feed. Now I know. And if you'll stay, you'll not just work here. You'll belong. Daniel's breath shuddered. The fury inside him dulled, but distrust remained sharp. He thought of Lily safe and smiling in Rosa's kitchen, her small hands kneading dough, her laughter ringing light. She deserved this place, this safety. But could he trust the man who had spun lies to test him? He looked at Ezra, the rancher's face carved by loss, by years of wind and sun, and something heavier than both. For the first time, Daniel glimpsed not just the hard man everyone feared, but the hollow beneath. Why us? Daniel whispered. Ezra's voice came quiet, almost pained. Because I've lost before. A wife. A son. Same cholera that took your parents. Since then, I've been alone. I needed to know if there were still people in this world who would fight for family. You and your sister. You showed me. The anger in Daniel loosened, though it didn't fade. He looked down at his blistered hands, then back toward the small house where Lily slept safe and warm. Ezra's gaze stayed on him, steady as stone. Think on it, boy. This place could be yours, and hers someday. But it starts with trust. That's the only way it works. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat burned too hot with tangled feelings. Ezra left him there on the ridge the valley spread below like a promise and a threat all at once. Daniel sank onto a boulder, burying his face in his hands. Relief that Lily was never hunted. Anger that his fear had been twisted. Awe at the possibility Ezra hinted at. It was too much for a boy of 14, yet it pressed on him like the weight of years. At last he lifted his head, staring at the ranch bathed in silver light. He whispered to the night to his parents, long gone, to the sister he swore to protect. I don't know if I can trust him, but I'll try. For Lily. The next morning, Daniel moved through his chores as though in a fog. His body shoveled, hauled, and hammered, but his mind reeled with Ezra's words from the ridge. No Morrison gang, no scar-faced outlaw waiting to slit his throat, just a test. A lie. Miguel noticed the boy's distraction. Your head, it's somewhere else today, the foreman said, tightening a post with calm efficiency. Daniel muttered, just tired. But Miguel's eyes were sharp. Cansancio is in the body, not in the eyes. You carry something heavier. Daniel didn't answer. How could he? He didn't know whether Ezra meant to save him and Lily or bend them into something of his own design. At supper, Lily was radiant. She chattered about the pies Rosa let her help bake, about how the chickens followed her into the yard, about how Rosa promised to teach her stitches for mending torn sleeves. She beamed at Daniel. Danny, I think I'm getting good at it. Rosa says I'm a fast learner, Daniel forced a smile. That's wonderful, Lily. But Ezra sat at the far end of the long table, his gaze flicking between them as if studying every word. Daniel felt it like a weight pressing his shoulders down. That night, once Lily slept, Daniel slipped outside. The moon carved silver over the cottonwoods. He wandered toward the corral tempest, shifting inside, ears pricking when she saw him. He reached through the rails, stroking her neck. She pressed against his hand, warm and steady. You trust me, he whispered. Why can't I trust him? Footsteps crunched behind him. Ezra. She's different with you, the rancher said quietly. Daniel didn't turn. Because I didn't lie to her. A long pause. Ezra came to stand beside him, pipe smoke curling faint in the night. You're angry. Daniel's fist tightened against the horse's mane. You let me think Lily was in danger. You let me believe I might die. And for what? So you could decide if I was worth feeding. Ezra's face was unreadable in the half-light. I let you show yourself. And you did. You showed me you're a boy who'll break his back for his sister, a boy who'd walk into the fire for her. That matters. Daniel turned, eyes blazing. It doesn't make it right. Ezra's gaze didn't waver. Maybe not. But out here, right and wrong bend. Survival doesn't. What I did was harsh, yes, but it was truth enough you were in danger. You just didn't see it. Starvation, cold, wolves in the night. You'd have buried that little girl before Christmas if I hadn't stepped in. Daniel's breath caught. The raw certainty in Ezra's tone rang like a bell. I don't need you to forgive me, Ezra said, but I need you to understand. I don't waste time on those who won't stand. You stood. The boy's anger cracked but didn't fade. He thought of Lily asleep under a quilt, cheeks flushed from real food. He thought of the bitter nights huddled in alleyways, her small body trembling beside him. Ezra wasn't wrong. They might not have survived another winter. Daniel's voice came rough. And if I had failed your test, if I had given up. Ezra drew on his pipe, eyes dark as coal. Then I'd have given you coin, sent you west with the supply wagon. You'd have made your own way. Or not. But I wouldn't have wasted this place on you. The bluntness stung. Yet beneath it, Daniel heard something else, the weight of loss, the emptiness of a man who had built an empire but had no one to trust with it. Ezra turned, smoke trailing behind him. Think on this, boy. You don't have to like my ways, but you'll see they keep you alive. He left Daniel with Tempest, who pressed her muzzle against his shoulder. Daniel leaned into her warmth, fighting the storm inside him. Days passed. Work filled the hours, but doubt filled the nights. Lily grew happier by the day, flour dusting her apron, laughter returning like spring water. She began calling Ezra Papa Eli when she thought Daniel wasn't listening. And Ezra, gruff, stern Ezra, never corrected her. Daniel watched it all with a heart split in two. One evening, Miguel found him repairing a gate. You brewed too much, the foreman said. Your sister? She smiles again. That should be enough. Daniel shook his head. I don't know if it's safe to trust him. Miguel studied him for a long moment. Then he said softly, El Patron lost a wife and son. Same sickness that took your parents. Since then, he has only this land. Men like him, they test because they are afraid to lose again. Daniel stared at the ground, his chest tight. That night, as he and Lily sat by their small hearth, she whispered, Danny, do you think we'll stay forever? He looked at her, the firelight painting her hair gold, her smile small but hopeful. He thought of Ezra's eyes, of Miguel's quiet words, of Rosa's kindness. I don't know, he said finally, but maybe. And for the first time, he wanted it to be true. The days lengthened into weeks, and life on the ranch folded into a rhythm that left little time for Daniel to dwell on the gnawing questions Ezra had planted. Still, the doubts were always there like a splinter under the skin, small, sharp, impossible to forget. Work was unrelenting. With autumn settling over the valley, fences needed reinforcement. Hay needed stacking in the barns, and cattle had to be driven closer to the river before the snows came. Daniel worked until his shoulders ached and his palms hardened into calluses. He moved from mucking stalls to hauling sacks of feed to repairing wagon wheels under Miguel's patient guidance. Strong back, quick hands. Miguel observed one morning as Daniel straightened from hammering an iron shoe into a mule's hoof. You learn fast. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow. I have to. Miguel's mouth tilted into a small smile. See, for her. His gaze flicked toward Lily, who sat near Rosa's skirts in the yard, carefully sewing stitches into a ragged apron. Daniel nodded without speaking. Lily blossomed in ways Daniel hadn't expected. Her cheeks filled out, no longer hollow with hunger. She carried herself with a brightness he hadn't seen since before their parents' deaths. In the kitchen, Rosa praised her quick hands. In the garden, she sang softly to herself while pulling weeds. She even made friends among the ranch hands. Old Pete let her ride on the supply wagon seat when it rolled out for nearby towns, and Jeremiah, the young hand who had sneered at them at supper, grudgingly carved her a whistle from willow wood. But Daniel noticed things Lily did not. Rosa sometimes studied him with the same measured gaze as Ezra, though hers was softer shaded with something like concern. And Ezra always. Ezra watched from the porch, his dark eyes steady, his presence looming even when silent. One evening after supper, Daniel walked past the bunkhouse and overheard whispers. Strange, isn't it? One hand muttered. Boss takes in orphans, spends food and work teaching them. Another snorted. He's building heirs. Man's got no blood left. Needs someone to leave all this to. Daniel froze his breath, catching. He crept away before they could see him, but the words gnawed at him. Heirs. Was that why Ezra had brought them here, to shape them into replacements for the family he had lost? That night, Daniel sat outside their little house staring at the stars. Lily leaned against him, humming a tune Mama used to sing. It feels like we belong here, she whispered. Daniel's chest tightened. Do you really? Yes. Her voice was sure. Rosa says I'm getting good in the kitchen, and Miguel told me I remind him of his little girl back in Mexico. Everyone is kind, even Papa Eli. Daniel flinched. Don't call him that. She looked up at him, puzzled. Why not? Because he's not our papa, Daniel said sharply, then softened at her hurt expression. Not yet. Not really. She pressed her lips together, then whispered, He feels like one. Daniel had no answer. The next morning, Ezra sought him out. They walked the pasture edge together, Tempest trailing quietly behind. Ezra's voice was low, even. "You're angry with me still," he said. Daniel stared at the ground. "You lied to me." "I tested you," Ezra corrected, "and you proved yourself. But I know trust doesn't grow in a day." "Why us?" Daniel blurted. "Out of everyone, why choose us?" Ezra stopped his tall frame, casting a long shadow. "Because I saw myself in you. A boy forced to be a man too early, a girl too young to carry grief in her eyes. And because," his voice caught roughened, "because I lost my son. Same sickness that took your folks. I buried him on that hill yonder. Since then, this ranch has been full of cattle and men, but empty of family." Daniel's throat tightened. He glanced at the hill Ezra pointed toward a lone oak rising against the sky. For the first time, he glimpsed the sorrow beneath the rancher's stone face. "You mean to make us your family?" Daniel said quietly. Ezra's jaw worked. "If you'll have it, not as charity, not as hired hands, as blood in all but name." Daniel's heart twisted. He wanted to believe it for Lily's sake. She was happy here, safer, healthier, brighter. But the lie Ezra had spun at the beginning still stung. He looked up at the rancher. "I don't know if I can trust you." Ezra's eyes softened just slightly. "Then give it time. Trust is built, not given. Prove yourself to me, and I'll prove myself to you. That's the bargain." Daniel nodded reluctantly, the words sticking like burrs in his chest. That evening, Lily danced barefoot in the yard, laughing as Rosa clapped a rhythm. The sound floated into the twilight light and unguarded. Daniel watched her, the memory of cold nights and empty stomachs burning against the sight of her joy. He whispered to himself, "If this is what it takes, I'll endure it. For her." But in the dark corner of the porch, Ezra stood silently watching with eyes that promised more tests yet to come. Autumn deepened into crisp mornings and evenings scented with wood smoke. Frost jeweled the grass at dawn, melting into streams that glittered down the valley. For Daniel and Lily, the week settled into routine, a rhythm they had never known on the streets. Daniel worked from first bell to last light. He drove cattle, hauled hay, and learned to mend harness leather until his fingers were stained with oil. Miguel was patient, sometimes gruff, but always steady, guiding him like a second father might. Daniel grew stronger, the hollowness in his cheeks filling out his shoulders, squaring with labor. Lily thrived in Rosa's kitchen. She learned to knead bread until her small fists ached to stir stews without scorching them, to clean hens with a speed that impressed even the older women who sometimes helped. Her laughter spilled into the yard when Rosa teased her in Spanish, and soon Lily echoed the words back, her tongue clumsy but eager. Daniel watched her with both pride and unease. She was happier than he had ever seen her, but her heart was opening quickly, too quickly, he feared, to Ezra. It began with small things. Ezra passed through the kitchen one evening and set a hand briefly on Lily's hair. She beamed up at him like the sun had come through the door. Another night, when she spilled flour across the table and began to cry, Ezra simply handed her a cloth. "Clean it up," he said firmly, but not unkindly. She did, smiling through the tears. Then came the day she tried the new name. "Papa Eli," she chirped, showing him a pie she and Rosa had baked. Ezra froze. For a heartbeat, the whole kitchen seemed to still. Rosa looked at him sharply, as if testing his response. Daniel's stomach clenched. Ezra studied Lily's bright face, then gave the faintest nod. "Good work," he said. Lily squealed with delight, throwing her arms around his waist. Daniel turned away, his chest burning. That night, Lily crawled into her quilt and whispered to Daniel, "He feels like a real papa." "Don't you think?" Daniel clenched his jaw. "He's not. Not yet." She frowned. "Why not?" "Because he lied to us," Daniel said bitterly. "Don't you remember the Morrison gang? He let me believe you were in danger." Lily hugged Annie tight. "But we are safe now. We have a home. Isn't that what matters?" Daniel had no answer. The next morning, Ezra sent Daniel with Miguel and 2 hands to round up stray cattle near the far ridge. The work was brutal, scrambling over rocky gullies, shouting until his throat was raw, tugging ropes against stubborn steers. Yet Daniel felt alive in it, like each muscle was hardening into something real. Miguel clapped him on the back when the herd was finally driven into the lower pasture. You're built for this life, muchacho, the foreman said. Strong, stubborn, loyal, same as the patron. Daniel stiffened. I'm not like him. Miguel smiled faintly. Not yet, but you could be. That evening, Ezra called him to the porch. They sat in silence, the lantern between them, throwing long shadows. You don't like that your sister calls me Papa Eli, Ezra said. Daniel's jaw tightened. She's too young to understand. She understands enough, Ezra countered. She knows safety when she feels it, knows strength when she sees it. He leaned forward, his eyes dark and steady. You should learn from her. Daniel bristled. She trusts too easily. That's dangerous. Ezra's mouth tightened beneath his mustache. Or maybe it's brave. Maybe she sees what you're too stubborn to admit, that this ranch could be your salvation. Daniel's fists clenched on his knees. You still lied to me. And I'd do it again, Ezra said flatly, because the truth I needed wasn't in your words, it was in what you'd sacrifice. That's the only way I could know you were worth my roof. Daniel's chest heaved, torn between anger and a strange yearning he didn't understand. He wanted to hate Ezra, but each day on the ranch, each smile from Lily chipped away at that anger. Later, lying awake, Daniel heard Lily mumbling in her sleep. Papa Eli. Danny. Her voice was content, soft as the night wind. Daniel turned toward the ceiling, eyes burning. Maybe she was right. Maybe Ezra could be more than the man who tested them with lies. But trust would come slower for him. Still, when dawn came and the bell rang again, Daniel rose without hesitation, pulling on his gloves. If nothing else, he would prove himself through work, the only truth he knew Ezra respected. And maybe, just maybe, that was how he could protect Lily, not only with his fists and his sacrifice, but with a future built here in this valley. Ezra seemed determined to tie them to. Winter pressed down hard on the valley. Snow came early that year, piling against fences, blanketing the pastures in white silence. Breath smoked from men and cattle alike, and every chore doubled in weight when done with frozen fingers. For Daniel, it was both torment and revelation. He rose in the dark, splitting kindling before breakfast, his axe biting deep into frosted logs. He drove hay sledges across the fields, the wind slashing his face raw. He shoveled roofs free of snow to keep the barns from collapsing. His body hardened each day, carving him closer into a man. Miguel often watched him with quiet approval. You work like one who's been here years, he remarked, not a boy dragged in from the street. Daniel only nodded, breath steaming. He didn't work for Ezra's praise, not really. He worked because Lily thrived here, her laughter ringing like bells through the house. She baked biscuits, patched clothes, sang while she swept. Sometimes he thought she had forgotten the alleyways, the hunger, the cold nights when they'd clung to each other just to stay alive. But Daniel had not forgotten, and Ezra's presence was a constant weight. He rarely spoke more than necessary, but his eyes never seemed to stop measuring Daniel. Whether at the table in the yard or across a frozen pasture, Daniel felt it, the unspoken test still unfolding. One night after a storm howled itself quiet, Daniel stepped out to the corral. Tempest stamped restlessly, her breath clouding in the moonlight. He stroked her neck, murmuring low, "She's restless like you." Ezra's voice came from the shadows. Daniel startled. "I didn't hear you." Ezra approached slowly, boots crunching on snow. He carried no lantern, only his pipe, the ember glowing faint. "You watch over her the way you watch over your sister." Daniel turned back to the mare. "She trusts me." Ezra stood beside him, silent, stretching. Then softly, "And you still don't trust me." Daniel's throat tightened. "You gave me reason not to." Ezra exhaled smoke, watching it curl into the cold. "Maybe I did. Maybe that's my flaw. But I'd rather a boy hate me for truth than love me for lies of comfort." Daniel's jaw worked. It wasn't truth. You invented an enemy. Ezra's gaze flicked toward him, sharp as flint. The enemy was real enough. Hunger, cold, despair. You think the Morrison gang worse than those? No, boy. I gave your fear a name so I could see how you'd fight it, and you did. Daniel turned away, anger and confusion churning. He wanted to spit words back at the man, but none came. The silence hung heavy until Ezra spoke again, his voice lower. "Your sister's begun calling me father. I don't correct her. Do you want me to?" Daniel froze, chest tightening. Ezra studied him. Say the word and I'll set her straight. I'll remind her you're all she has. Daniel's eyes burned. She's happy, happier than she's been in years. Ezra nodded once, then let her keep it. Whatever name she calls me, you're still her anchor. That doesn't change. Daniel swallowed hard, struggling with the lump in his throat. Ezra's words were steady, almost gentle, yet they felt like a burden pressed onto his shoulders. The following weeks tested them more. Supplies ran low after the storm delayed the wagon from town. For 3 days they rationed flour and beans, and Daniel caught Ezra eating less than the others, though he never spoke of it. Lily noticed whispering to Daniel, He gives me the bigger piece on purpose. Daniel couldn't deny it. Then came the wolf. One night, howls split the darkness, chilling the marrow of every man on the ranch. The cattle bawled, panicked. Daniel grabbed a lantern and rifle heart pounding and ran with Miguel and Ezra to the far pasture. There, under the moon's cold light, a wolf had brought down a calf. Its eyes gleamed as it snarled blood on its muzzle. Ezra raised his rifle. Before he could fire, Daniel stepped forward, breath steaming. He leveled his own weapon, hands trembling, but steady enough, and shot. The wolf dropped instantly, snow flying. Ezra's gaze cut to him unreadable. Then slowly the rancher nodded. You're learning, he said. Daniel's chest heaved, his breath ragged. He wasn't sure if he felt pride or fear. The carcass was hauled away, the calf buried. Back in the yard, Lily clung to him, whispering, Danny, you saved us. But Ezra stood in the shadows, watching with those dark eyes that seemed to weigh Daniel's every move, as if deciding with each act whether the boy truly belonged or whether more trials still waited. And Daniel, lying awake that night, realized something: the ranch was no longer just shelter. It was becoming a crucible, and Ezra was the fire. The new year opened with bitter winds that seemed determined to scour the valley clean of all softness. Snow still clung to the ridges, but the river below flowed black and swift, carving its way past the frozen earth. Daniel rose each dawn before the bell, his breath fogging the air as he split wood, his muscles roped and hardened by months of labor. Lily, meanwhile, bloomed like spring flowers waiting under frost. Her cheeks glowed with health, her hair shone from Rosa's careful braiding, and her laughter warmed even the coldest nights in the kitchen. Sometimes she would hum while stirring a pot, and the ranch hands would lean near the door just to listen. To Daniel's eyes, she was safe here, too safe. She looked at Ezra with unguarded affection, a trust so whole it frightened him. One evening as they gathered for supper, Lily shyly set a small bundle of cloth before Ezra. I made this for you, she said, her voice trembling with pride. Ezra unfolded it slowly, a scarf clumsily knit its stitches, uneven but earnest. He held it in his large hands, eyes unreadable. Then, without a word, he wrapped it around his neck. Fits fine, he murmured. Lily beamed, cheeks pink, while Rosa clapped her hands in delight. Daniel sat rigid at the table, torn between gratitude and unease. That night, when Lily curled beside him in their small room, she whispered, He's like a father, Danny. Can't you feel it? Daniel stared at the ceiling beams. A father doesn't lie. She sighed. Maybe he only lied once. Maybe he's telling the truth now. Daniel couldn't answer. The days pressed on, and Ezra gave Daniel more responsibility. He sent him riding ahead with Miguel to scout fence lines, trusted him to lead younger hands in clearing snow from the creek banks, even allowed him to tally feed supplies in the barn ledger. You'll run this ranch one day if you keep sharp, Miguel remarked. Daniel bristled. I'm not staying forever. Miguel only shrugged. Life has a way of choosing for us. The weight of those words followed Daniel into his dreams. Then came the fire. It sparked in the hay barn during a night of high winds, maybe from a lantern left too close to the bales. Flames licked upward in seconds, a roaring furnace that lit the sky red. Shouts rang out as men scrambled with buckets, but the inferno spread too fast. Daniel ran into the smoke without thinking, Lily's terrified cry echoing behind him. He grabbed a halter rope, stumbling toward the horses still trapped inside. Tempest screamed, rearing against her stall. Danny Miguel's voice bellowed, Get out! But Daniel pressed on, coughing eyes stinging. He flung the gate wide, slapped Tempest's flank, and she bolted through the haze. 2 more horses thundered out after her hooves, sparking on the frozen ground. The beam above him cracked. And then Ezra was there, bursting through the smoke, his arm like iron, as he hauled Daniel by the collar. They stumbled into the night just as the barn roof collapsed in a spray of sparks. Daniel collapsed on the frozen dirt, hacking his chest burning. Ezra stood over him, face blackened with soot, eyes blazing. "You fool!" the rancher roared. "Were you trying to die?" Daniel coughed hard, voice hoarse. "The horses! I'd sooner lose 10 horses than one boy stupid enough to run into fire," Ezra barked. Then his voice broke quieter. "Rawer, don't ever do that again." For the first time, Daniel saw something unguarded in the man's eyes. Not anger, fear. Later, after the flames were doused and the barn reduced to smoking ruin, Lily crawled into Daniel's lap, weeping with relief. Ezra stood a distance away, watching them. His scarf. Lily's scarf still tied around his neck, though singed at the edges. Daniel's chest ached as he held his sister close. For the first time, he wondered if Ezra's tests were less about control and more about survival, whether he was forging Daniel not into a servant, but into a son who could endure the valley's harshness. The thought unsettled him more than the fire itself, because part of him, a part he didn't want to admit, almost wanted it to be true. The charred remains of the hay barn smoldered for days, a black scar against the snow. Men worked to clear rubble, piling ruined timbers into carts, while Ezra stood silent and grim, his eyes tracing every ember as though measuring what had been lost. Daniel worked beside Miguel, his hands blistered from hauling his chest still sore from smoke, but he said nothing about the fire, about Ezra dragging him out, about the words that had cracked the man's steady voice. Lily, on the other hand, spoke freely. She clung to Ezra's sleeve the next morning, her eyes wide. "You saved my brother," she said with fierce certainty. Ezra's mouth twitched just barely. "Your brother saved the horses. I only saved his foolish hide." But Lily beamed at him as though he had confessed to heroism. Daniel looked away, unsure what to feel. Life on the ranch pressed forward, as it always did. A new barn was planned, lumber ordered from town. Daniel helped with the rebuilding, learning to drive nails straight and true under Miguel's watchful eye. Each swing of the hammer strengthened him each day of labor, deepening the strange bond he both resented and depended on. Ezra gave him more trust. He sent Daniel with 2 men to sell hides in town, handed him the ledger to tally expenses, even asked his opinion once on where to drive a new fence line. "You've got an eye for land," Ezra said one evening, studying Daniel across the porch lantern glow. "That matters more than muscle." Daniel stiffened the praise twisting inside him. "I'm just doing what I'm told." Ezra puffed his pipe smoke, curling into the cold. That's what separates a boy from a man, knowing when to obey and when to think for himself. The words lingered long after Ezra walked away. Meanwhile, Lily grew deeper into the rhythm of the house. She stitched curtains with rosa-red psalms in the lamplight and sometimes fell asleep at the kitchen table, her small head resting against her arms. Rosa would tuck a quilt around her shoulders, murmuring, "Nina, you belong here." Daniel overheard it once and felt a pang so sharp it nearly doubled him. Belong. Did they? Or were they only guests in Ezra Blackthorn's world surviving at his mercy? That question deepened when a stranger rode into the yard one afternoon. A rider with a scarred cheek and a sneer too practiced to be friendly. He dismounted, slow eyes scanning the buildings with a hunger. Daniel recognized one he had seen in alleys and men ready to steal, or worse. "Looking for a girl," the stranger drawled. "Heard she was taken in here." Ezra stepped onto the porch, his frame filling the doorway. "You heard wrong." The man spat. "She's small, dark hair, would have been with a scrawny boy." His gaze flicked to Daniel and Lily, who stood frozen by the corral. "There they are." Daniel's stomach dropped. Ezra descended the steps, each movement deliberate, heavy with threat. "You should leave before the sun drops lower. My men don't like scavengers after dark." The stranger's eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought he might draw his gun. But something in Ezra's gaze made him hesitate. He swung onto his horse, sneering. "This ain't over." He rode out the dust of his horse's hooves trailing across the pale sky. Lily clung to Daniel, whispering, "Danny, he knew us." Daniel's chest heaved. "I know." Ezra's shadow fell over them. Inside, he ordered. His tone brooked no argument. That night, Daniel lay awake staring at the rafters. Ezra had turned the man away without firing a shot, but his words had carried a weight Daniel couldn't shake. Whoever that rider was, he knew pieces of their past, and if one man could find them, others might too. Ezra sat long on the porch pipe ember glowing red against the black. Daniel saw him through the window, silent, watchful. Not just a rancher, not just a judge, a sentinel. And Daniel realized with both fear and relief that whatever bound them to this place had only tightened. The valley was no longer just a refuge, it was a battlefield waiting to happen. The stranger's visit left a shadow over the ranch. Even after the man rode off, Lily trembled for days, clinging close to Rosa in the kitchen and refusing to let Daniel out of her sight. Daniel himself grew restless, every creak of the barn and distant bark of coyotes setting his nerves on edge. Ezra, however, moved with a grim calm, as if he had expected this reckoning all along. He doubled the night patrols, armed his hands more heavily, and spent long hours on the porch, smoking in silence. Daniel finally confronted him one morning, fists clenched at his sides. "You knew someone would come." Ezra didn't look up from the harness he was oiling. "Men like that always come when there's weakness to feed on." Daniel's voice cracked. "We weren't weak, we were surviving." Ezra's gaze lifted sharp as steel. "Surviving isn't the same as living. Out there you were prey. Here you'll learn to be something more." Daniel's jaw worked, torn between anger and a strange recognition that the man might be right. But he hated that Ezra always had the last word. The tension only deepened when 2 weeks later tracks were found near the northern fence line. Boot prints, not belonging to any hand on the ranch. Miguel reported it grimly. "They're watching us." Ezra ordered the children kept inside. He armed Daniel with a short rifle, handing it to him without ceremony. "You're old enough. Guard your sister." Daniel's palms sweated as he gripped the weapon. "What if I can't?" Ezra cut him off, voice low. "Then you'll die standing, but you won't fail." It was not comfort, but it was command. Daniel swallowed hard and nodded. Nights became heavy with silence. Lily slept fitfully, whispering in her dreams. Daniel sat by the window rifle across his lap, staring at the black tree line beyond the pasture. He felt older than his years, wearied by dread. Then came the attack. It happened just before dawn when frost still crusted the earth. A shot rang out, cracking through the stillness. Men shouted. Horses screamed. Daniel bolted upright, dragging Lily from her bed. Rosa herded them toward the cellar, but before they could descend, Ezra strode in, rifle in hand, eyes blazing. "Stay with me," he barked. Gunfire rattled outside, echoing off the barn walls. The stranger with the scar had returned, and he hadn't come alone. Shadows moved against the paling horizon, 5, maybe 6 men, their muzzles flaring. Ezra shoved Daniel toward the door. "You're with me. Lily stays." Daniel's stomach turned to ice. "No, you want to prove you're more than prey. Now's the time." Ezra's voice was like iron. Daniel's hand shook as he clutched his rifle, but he followed. They spilled into the yard where Miguel and the others were already firing from behind water troughs and fence posts. Bullets cracked against wood splinters flying. Ezra crouched low, returning fire with steady precision. Daniel dropped beside him, heart hammering, ears ringing. He sighted down the barrel, finger trembling, and squeezed. A figure cried out, stumbling back into the snow. Daniel's breath caught. He had hit someone. Ezra's hand clapped briefly against his shoulder, a wordless acknowledgement, before the man turned back to the fight. The battle raged until the sun cleared the ridge. At last the attackers retreated, dragging their wounded with them, the scarred man shouting curses that promised return. Smoke hung in the cold air. The ranch yard was pocked with bullet holes, fences splintered, a shed ablaze. One ranch hand lay still, blood staining the snow. Daniel's rifle slipped from his hands. His chest heaved, his body shaking with both horror and strange exhilaration. He had stood and fought. Ezra turned to him, his face grave but steady. "Now you understand. This land takes blood. Always has, always will. Question is whose blood buys your tomorrow." Daniel swallowed, staring at the dark stains in the snow. For the first time he glimpsed the world as Ezra saw it, brutal, unyielding, demanding strength above all else. And though he hated to admit it, he knew Ezra was right. The yard smelled of smoke and blood for days after the fight. The wounded were tended in the bunkhouse, and the dead were buried on a rise overlooking the valley, a crude wooden cross hammered into the frozen earth. Lily cried through the service, clutching Daniel's hand while Ezra stood silent, hat in hand, his face carved into something harder than stone. Daniel could not shake the memory of the man he had shot. It returned each night in dreams, the flash of the muzzle, the stranger's body staggering back into the snow. He had defended his home, he told himself. He had defended Lily, but the weight of it sat heavy on his chest. One night Ezra found him awake, staring at the embers in the hearth. "It doesn't leave you easy, does it?" Daniel's voice was hoarse. "I killed him." Ezra lowered into the chair opposite his pipe unlit in his hands. "You defended what's yours. That's different." Daniel shook his head. "I don't even know his name." "Names don't matter," Ezra said. "Only the choice you made when it counted. A man's defined by that." Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to spit back that Ezra had forced this life onto him. But deep down, he knew the man spoke truth. He had made the choice. The weeks that followed brought an uneasy calm. Patrols were doubled, supplies guarded. The scarred stranger never returned, though the men spoke of him like a ghost still circling the valley. Lily began to pray aloud each night. Small hands clasped her voice, quivering as she asked God to make the bad men go away forever. Daniel listened, torn between bitterness and hope. Ezra threw himself into rebuilding. The new barn rose beam by beam, stronger than the last. He set Daniel to work at his side, not sparing him the heaviest labor. "Your back will remember what your mind forgets," he said, forcing the boy to lift, to haul, to sweat until his muscles screamed. By spring the valley thawed, and with it came a fragile sense of peace. Calves bawled in the pastures, wildflowers speckled the hills, and Lily's laughter carried once more across the yard. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the ridge, Ezra gathered the household. His voice carried heavy in the quiet. "You all know the danger's not gone. Men who came once can come again. But this ranch stands because we fought together, and it will stand tomorrow for the same reason." His gaze lingered on Daniel, steady measuring. The boy proved himself. He fought, he bled, he stayed. That makes him one of us. The hands murmured their agreement. Miguel clapped Daniel's back. Even Rosa's eyes brimmed as she whispered, "Familia." Daniel's heart pounded. Part of him swelled with pride, another recoiled. He wanted to shout that he hadn't chosen this, that Ezra had forced his hand since the night he'd taken them in. But when Lily tugged his sleeve, whispering, "We belong here, Danny," he felt his resistance crumbling. Later, when the others drifted to their beds, Daniel lingered on the porch. Ezra stood beside him, pipe smoke curling into the warm night. "You hate me still?" Ezra asked, not unkindly. Daniel's jaw clenched. "I don't know." Ezra nodded, as though satisfied with honesty. "Hate's not the opposite of belonging. A man can hate and still be bound tighter than blood." Daniel turned to him, eyes narrowing. "What do you want from me?" Ezra's gaze fixed on the dark horizon. Not obedience, not gratitude, just strength, because when I'm gone, this land will eat the weak alive. And she, his eyes flicked toward the window where Lily slept, she'll need someone who can stand. Daniel's breath caught. For a moment he saw past the hardness, past the tests and lies, into the truth Ezra had carried all along. He was shaping Daniel, not for his own sake, but for Lily's. And though Daniel's heart raged, some buried part of him understood. Spring deepened into summer, and with it came both warmth and unease. The valley bloomed green wildflowers nodding in the breeze, calves frisking in the meadows. Yet Daniel couldn't shake the tension that hummed beneath each day, the knowledge that the scarred stranger or men like him might return at any moment. He worked harder than ever, sweat soaking his shirt as he hauled fence posts, drove cattle, and learned the quiet rhythm of Ezra's land. Ezra said little, but his eyes followed Daniel with a weight that was neither judgment nor approval, something deeper, a recognition forming in silence. Lily thrived, her small world filled with chores, songs, and Rosa's gentle guidance. Sometimes Daniel watched her spinning barefoot in the grass, her laughter ringing clear, and for a fleeting moment he almost believed they had found peace. But peace never lasted long in the valley. One blistering afternoon, riders were spotted on the far ridge. Miguel rode in, dust caked on his face. 6 men, he said grimly. Could be more behind. Ezra didn't flinch. It was only a matter of time. The household gathered tense and silent. Lily clutched Daniel's hand, whispering, "Is it them?" Daniel's mouth was dry. Maybe. Ezra's gaze swept over them all. This ranch holds. It holds because we stand. But this time the boy decides. All eyes turned to Daniel. He stiffened, heat rising in his chest. "Me." Ezra nodded once. "I can lead. I can fight. But they came for you and your sister. If you choose to run, we'll cover you. If you choose to stand, we'll stand with you. Say the word." Daniel's heart thundered. Run. The thought burned with temptation. To flee into the hills, vanish before more blood was spilled. But then Lily's grip tightened on his hand. Her eyes, wide, fragile, trusting, searched his face. He heard Ezra's words echo. "When I'm gone, this land will eat the weak alive. She'll need someone who can stand." Daniel raised his chin, forcing strength into his voice. "We stand." A murmur of assent rippled through the men. Ezra's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but the closest Daniel had ever seen. Then we stand. That night, the ranch became a fortress. Rifles were loaded, lanterns dimmed, positions chosen. Daniel stood shoulder to shoulder with Ezra on the porch rifle in his hands, the weight of his choice heavy but resolute. The riders came at dawn. 6 shadows against the rising sun, led by the scarred man, his sneer as sharp as the edge of a knife. "Give me the girl," he shouted across the yard. "And the boy, if you care to keep breathing." Ezra didn't answer. He only glanced at Daniel. Daniel stepped forward, voice shaking but strong. "You'll have to kill me first." The man's laugh was cold. Easy done. Gunfire erupted. The battle was fierce, brutal smoke and thunder shattering the morning. Men fell, blood darkened the dust, but the ranch hands fought with the desperation of men defending home. Daniel fired until his shoulder bruised, until his ears rang, until he could no longer tell if the pounding in his chest was fear or fury. When the dust cleared, the riders lay scattered, defeated. The scarred man crawled in the dirt, blood streaming from his side. Daniel stood over him, rifle shaking in his grip. Ezra's voice cut through the silence. "Your choice, boy." Daniel's finger hovered on the trigger. For one burning second, he saw Lily's face, heard her prayers whispered in the night. Slowly, he lowered the rifle. "Go," he said through clenched teeth. "And if you ever come back, I won't miss." The man spat, cursed, then dragged himself to his horse and fled into the horizon. Silence fell heavy over the ranch yard. Daniel's chest heaved, his whole body trembling, but he had stood. He had chosen. Ezra laid a hand on his shoulder, steady and firm. "Now you're more than prey." Daniel met his eyes, and for the first time he didn't see just a captor or a judge or even a rancher. He saw a man who had carved him into something stronger, something unbreakable. And though he would never say it aloud, part of him was grateful. Lily ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "We're safe, Danny," she whispered. For now, Daniel thought. But as he held her tight rifle still warm in his hand, he knew one thing with certainty. Whatever the valley demanded, he would be ready to pay it. Because he had chosen to stand. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you. We listen to you. And we are honored to tell these stories for you.